Hi, thanks for joining. We'll be starting just in a few minutes here. Let everybody go ahead and join. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Um, I'm Molly with Hospi Corporation. And in observance of Grief Awareness Week, Hospi is absolutely honored to host Deborah Grassman and Angie Snyder of Opus Pieces of Opus Peace. Today they'll be presenting Liberating, Unmourned, Loss and Hurt. Absolutely, it's a pleasure to hear their information and discussion today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to write them in the chat. At the end of the presentation, we'll do a Q&A. We'll make sure we get your questions addressed. I'm gonna give it straight away to Angie. She's gonna talk about information about the CEU and get us started with some introductions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. And thank you to Betsy and Molly and Hospi Corporation for having us today. So I did want to share that today's presentation does include one contact hour for nurses and also for counselors. Opus Peace is accredited as a provider for nursing continuing professional development by the ANCC, and we also provide counselor continuing education through the Association for Addiction Professionals. So to receive full credit, you must attend the entire live session. For anyone who's watching the recording, they do not offer CEUs for the recording. You then will get a link from me, so everyone who's on today will get a follow-up email with a link for both a test and also an evaluation. You can fill those out, and when we receive those back, then you will get your continuing education certificate. So we will get those off to you via email. So again, I'm Angie Snyder. I'm the Executive Director for Opus Peace, and it is an honor to be here to present during Grief Awareness Week, and we thank Hospi Corps for seeing the value in learning about liberating unmourned loss. It is also my honor to introduce to you my co-presenter, Deborah Grassman. So Deborah is a nurse practitioner, and she is also the founder of Opus Peace, which is a nonprofit organization that is based in St. Petersburg, Florida. So Deborah is a contributing author for multiple articles. She also has 3 books, Peace at Last and The Hero Within, and her 3rd book, which will be published in February, titled Soul Injury. She also is featured in 4 documentary films and also has a TED Talk. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Deborah. Deborah, I will share our slides.
All right. Well, thank you, Angie. Thank you, Hospi Corps, again, for wanting to educate all of us in liberating unmourned loss and hurt, because unmourned loss and hurt is at the core of soul injuries. So briefly, soul injury is defined as a wound that separates you from your real self. And there are 3 things that you can that can cause a soul injury. One is unmourned loss and hurt. Also, unforgiven guilt and shame. And fear of helplessness and loss of control. I'm going to show you just a few quotes from some of our past participants at our workshops who have told us how they acquired their soul injuries. So I want you to pay attention to how, even though loss is not specifically mentioned, loss is still embedded within each wounded soul. Listen to these quotes. I felt lonely when I came to this country as a boy, and I couldn't speak the language. I didn't belong. Even after all these years, I'm still an outsider looking in. I felt lost after I retired. After all these years, I still don't know what to do with myself. I'm left wandering around trying to find the fire in my belly, and I fear that there's no spark to find. I only knew how to please other people. I thought that if I gave my own opinion or did something for myself, that I was being selfish. I was really living an imitation of everyone else's life except my own. My wrinkles, my gray hair, my saggy arms. I'm competing with a younger version of myself, and I know I can never win. I feel useless and depressed. I was always compared to my older brother. As hard as I tried, I never measured up. I strived for perfection in everything I did to try to erase the feelings of not being good enough or smart enough, but it didn't work. After the death of my marriage, I died too. When is that loss going to stop paralyzing me? My dad yelled, "No son of mine is going to be a goddamn faggot." Then he locked me in a closet and told me not to come out until I could be the boy that God made me to be. My family only valued boys. My parents never let me forget that I was a girl. Somehow, I always felt guilty for letting them down. In some ways, I still do.
Loss, loss, loss. Loss of self-worth, fear of who we are and who we are not. It was in every single one of those quotes. Now, we often associate loss with death and bereavement, but loss is a part of life. And no matter what the loss is, there's usually a certain degree of hurt. Now, we often think that it is there to hurt us or to harm us, but it is simply a human response to loss. It is part of the human experience. It's the fear of the loss that causes the damage. Now, there are lots of losses that all of us have in our lives: a divorce, a move, graduation, promotion. And major losses seldom incur with just one loss. Small losses accumulate, they add up. An insidious loss is like a tank with a slow dripping tap. Now, someone at one of our workshops said something very profound. She said, "I couldn't heal because I kept pretending that I wasn't hurting." Now, we usually think of grieving as negative, as something that we want to avoid. So, how can grieving help us heal? It's because grieving is actually creative. Grieving helps us let go of what was and open up to what is. It's unmourned grief and loss that is destructive. Grieving is the natural, normal experience of loss, and we are born knowing this. There's a story about a 5-year-old boy who comes home late for dinner. His mother scolds him and asks him where he's been. The little boy tells her that he was helping his friend fix his tricycle. His mother looks at him skeptically and says, "You don't know how to fix tricycles." And the little boy says, "I couldn't fix it, but I could help him cry." So you see how we innately know how to grieve. It's society's fear of distress that causes us to forget and causes us to incorporate that fear as we grow up. So let's compare grieving and mourning now. Conscious grieving and conscious mourning both require honesty, courage, and humility. Grief is the inward experience of loss and hurt, whereas mourning is the outward expression of loss and hurt. In other words, you feel grief. You don't feel mourning. Mourning is an act. It's something you do. Grief occurs automatically without your conscious control. Now, disappointments are a form of loss. So, for example, pretend like you were diagnosed with a chronic illness that will significantly impact your quality of life. When you get the news, you are certainly going to be disappointed. That disappointment is actually grief, the loss of well-being, the possible loss of future pleasures, and other losses. And whether you realize it or not, the grief will automatically register in your body. Your heart sinks when you get the news. Your heart rate increases as you protest that it shouldn't or couldn't happen. And then what? You have to decide what you are going to do with this loss. In other words, how will you express it? Expression of your loss is called mourning, and this is a conscious choice.
You know, hurting people often hurt other people. And until we recognize that hate, despair, and hostility are actually the acting out of unmourned losses and hurts, then we will continue to look in the wrong place to heal the violence in our world. So, what choice do you make with your hurt? Will you take some time to abide with that loss? Maybe breathe deeply and go for a walk to take in the loss? To abide with it before you decide how to express it? Will you anchor your heart so you can stay grounded in your experience? Now, if you're afraid to feel your hurt, then you probably wouldn't think to do these things. What might you do instead? Well, anger is a great way to keep from feeling your pain. Or maybe you pout, go into your room, slamming the door, withdraw for a few days. Or maybe you're the kind that just pretends like it doesn't hurt. You're just going to rise above it, ignore it, banish it into unconsciousness where it'll get stored in your body as tension or pain or other symptoms. You know, looking on the bright side instead of feeling the hurt is deceptively counterproductive. Positive thinking can become an unrecognized numbing agent when it's misused to try to deny a distressing inner experience. Some professionals use the term toxic positivity to describe people who have to have an agenda to maintain a smiling facade no matter what the grim circumstance might be. And you know, Viktor Frankl called it artificial optimism. Paradoxically, people who persist in artificial optimism actually fear negativity, fear loss. Not only that, they don't trust themselves to be able to handle loss and negativity. You know, there's a big difference between thinking positive and being positive. Being positive means you develop enough self-confidence to figure out how to somehow navigate loss and hurt. So instead of artificial optimism, World Bank President Jim Young Kim encourages people to shift positive thinking to positive will, he calls it. Positive will to overcome obstacles by cultivating an indomitable spirit that faces negative realities with perseverance. Listen to what he says. He says, we need to have pessimism of the intellect, but optimism of the will. He says this is the recipe for self-confidence. Now, whichever coping mechanism you use, grieving without conscious mourning means you stay stuck in the past, victimized by the loss. So you can see how we are a society that is blatantly afraid of emotional distress. So unmourned loss and hurt is rampant. Unmourned loss and hurt is controlling us unconsciously. Unmourned loss and hurt is sabotaging lives in subtle and not so subtle ways. And we need to change that. I want to read to you a poem that gives us some clues for how to do that. It's a soulful poem that helps us understand the value of learning how to mourn and also the value of helping other people mourn, being safe environments for their grief. And you know, poetry in the arts is one way to express the soul's language. So let me read to you some excerpts from a famous poem by Oriah Mountain Dreamer. It's entitled The Invitation. It allows us to imagine a life without the fear of feeling our loss and hurt. Here's what she says. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow. I want to know if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or if you have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can disappoint another in order to be true to yourself. I want to know if you can see beauty, even when it's not pretty, every day. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout yes to the silver of the full moon. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have or who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company that you keep in the empty moments. Let's just sit for a moment and anchor your heart and breathe the beauty of that last line. Being alone with yourself for just 15 seconds and pausing within that emptiness to connect with your real self. Now bring that company of yourself with you, taking a deep breath as we move on.
So do you now realize that denial may be a numbing agent you've been using to minimize the losses that you've experienced? And do you know what the word denial stands for? Don't even notice I am lying. At Opus Peace, we use a tool called Empty, Open, Dwell. And it helps you to learn how to release the unmourned loss and hurt that you are holding. And once you learn to do that, you will find that you have much less of a need in your life for denial. And instead, you can access your soul to give you strength to carry your burdens. You want to speak the pain in your soul, draw your pain, dance your pain, sing your pain, cry your pain, dream your pain, scream your pain, exercise your pain, write your pain a letter, have your pain write you a letter. So to summarize the steps to good grief and effective mourning, you want to develop the honesty, courage, and humility to be aware of the loss, to acknowledge the loss, to feel the hurt of the loss, to connect to the part of yourself that is holding the loss. You want to notice your resistance and ask yourself, what relationship do you want to have with the loss? And then choose how to mourn the loss. So let's apply this to professional lives.
You know, the chaplain that I worked with on our hospice team always reminded the team of this. He would say, you know, it's unethical to ask our patients to do what we ourselves are unwilling to do. Isn't that so true? How can we help other people with their anger, their pain, their shame, their helplessness, if we don't know how to abide with our own anger and pain and guilt, shame, and helplessness? You know, it starts by having the courage to feel our own pain. This is a book of poetry written by nurses who served in Vietnam. They were war victim advocates, and they often suffered PTSD in the aftermath of war. They used poetry and the arts to recover, and I want to read to you one of those poems. See if you can relate to the impact that trauma and violence can have on your brain and on your soul as you listen. Hello, David. My name is Dusty. I'm your night nurse. I'll hang more blood and give you something for your pain. I'll stay with you, and I will touch your face. Yes, of course, I'll write your mother and tell her you were brave. I'll write your mother and tell her how much you loved her. I'll write your mother and tell her to give your bratty kid sister a big kiss and a hug. I'll stay with you, and I will hold your hand. I'll stay with you and watch your life flow through my fingers into my soul. I'll stay with you until you stay with me. Goodbye, David. My name is Dusty. I am the last person you will see. I am the last person you will touch. I am the last person who will love you. So long, David. My name is Dusty. David, who will give me something for my pain? So we chose this particular poem for that last line. Who will give me something for my pain? You know, if you work in a helping role that involves interacting with people who have experienced trauma, violence, or death, then you are surrounded by stress, pain, grief, anger, helplessness, and that impacts you. That causes the stress chemicals to be activated. And stress chemicals put you on alert. They take you out of being grounded in your body. And they often cause you to numb out and disconnect from yourself. So let me give you a video example of the loss that healthcare professionals experience. I'm going to show you a video of Kathy Burkhart, one of our Opus Peace ambassadors, and she's talking about how she almost stayed stuck in her grief rather than deciding to mourn her grief so it could be released. Now, Kathy is a nurse practitioner, and she had met with a patient and she had sent him for a biopsy. So let's listen to what happens next.
So I saw him back in follow-up, and he told me he didn't have cancer. And I said, great. And I dutifully documented in my chart and went about my busy day. And a few months later, his biopsy report came across my desk, and he did have cancer, and it had spread. I can remember that moment like it was yesterday. I was sick inside. I was just like, oh my God, how could this have happened? So I called him let him know that he needed to get into treatment right away and made those arrangements. He was very forgiving of the mistake that I made. My lead physician was very understanding. The chief of staff couldn't have been any kinder or more supportive. My husband, who is a physician, was a great shoulder for me to cry on. My friends who I dare divulge this horrible mistake to, the few that I did, were very supportive and very kind. Now, you would think that that would be fine enough and that I could just move on. However, it didn't help. I let this one event define who I was as a nurse practitioner. I went from being a confident, respected nurse practitioner to an anxious provider who checked and rechecked every lab that came across the desk and every report. I was becoming exhausted and anxious because I was just waiting fearfully for that next time. I had developed an insidious soul injury that corrupted my sense of self, so much so that the job I loved, I now considered quitting. This is just this one incident in my life, but the losses I experienced, let me count them. Self-confidence, self-esteem, self-respect, reputation, my peace of mind, my security, and I almost left the job and career that I loved. It wasn't until I was able to really sit in my pain and forgive myself for this error that I made that I was able to move beyond and start the healing process. And I'm so glad I did. For just a few months ago in Denver, Colorado, I was given a National Nursing Award that I will forever be grateful for.
So the question becomes, what do you do with your pain? Think about that for a moment. It's an important question for you to be able to answer. Or is your reality that you take care of one patient or one patient's family and then you go right into the next and the next and the next? Because I contend that the distress is not so much about the loss, hurt, and grief that you are exposed to. It's that there is no time, no space, no method to release the loss, hurt, and grief. So do you know what you do with your pain? Where does your pain go when you shut it down? And how does your response to your own pain impact how you respond to other people's pain? Helping, fixing, and serving represent three different ways of seeing life. Rachel Naomi Reman says that it's a matter of perspective. She says that when you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. When you serve, you see life as whole. She says that fixing and helping may be the work of the ego, and service the work of the soul. So which one of these perspectives is your perspective? If you become aware, you might discover that you might adopt all three. In other words, in certain situations or with certain people, you tend to help. In others, you tend to fix. And still others, you move into serving. And as Riemann defines service, when we can serve rather than help or fix, then we are dwelling from our soul rather than from our ego.
Dr. Milton Erickson gives us the secret for liberating the fear of emotional pain. Now, there's no bigger logs to get jammed up than numbing agents. So let me ask you about your favorite numbing agents. What numbing agents do you use to avoid feeling your pain? We all use them. And as a hospice nurse, I can tell you that numbing agents become more apparent as people face the end of their lives. Now, what you see up on your screen is just a small list. There are lots more. And we all have tactics to camouflage our pain. So is camouflage important in untrustworthy environments? Yes. But what's the problem? The problem is we end up wearing our camo at home with ourselves and with others who are trustworthy. And where does that lead? It leads to a passionless life. We end up selling our soul, so to speak. So what's your favorite numbing agent? It's important that you know, because once we have less of a relationship with our numbing agents, then we can have more of a relationship with our soul. And isn't it amazing how we hang on to numbing agents even though we know it's impending our well-being? One woman described it to us like this. She said, "I'm determined to change today, at least until it becomes unpleasant. And when it becomes unpleasant, I'm going to go back to eating cookies." Now, we laugh at this uproariously, but what she is saying is so true. Conditioned for instant gratification, we are vulnerable to return to old habits during transition periods when we start feeling anxious or uncomfortable. Now I'm going to show you a video that helps us learn how to say goodbye to the logs that are jamming up the flow to our vitality and robbing us of our passion.
Through the back window of our 59 wagon, I watched my best friend Jamie slipping further away. I kept on waving till I couldn't see her. Then through my tears I asked again why we couldn't stay. Mama whispered softly, "Time will ease your pain. Life's about changing, nothing ever stays the same." And she said, "How can I help you to say goodbye? It's okay to hurt, and it's okay to cry. Come, let me hold you, and I will try. How can I help you to say goodbye?" I sat on our bed, he packed his suitcase. I held a picture of our wedding day. His hands were trembling, we both were crying. He kissed me gently, and then he quickly walked away. I called her Mama, she said, "Time will ease your pain. Life's about changing, nothing ever stays the same." And she said, "How can I help you to say goodbye? It's okay to hurt, and it's okay to cry. Come, let me hold you, and I will try. How can I help you to say goodbye?" Sitting with Mama, alone in her bedroom, she opened her eyes and then squeezed my hand. She said, "I have to go now. My time here is over. And with her final words, she tried to help me understand. Mama whispered softly, time will ease your pain. Life's about changing, nothing ever stays the same. And she said, how can I help you to say goodbye? It's okay to hurt, and it's okay to cry. Come, let me hold you, and I will try. How can I help you to say goodbye?
Before we finish up our presentation and move to questions, I'll ask everyone to just pause for a moment. Anchor your heart with one or both of your hands, and lower or close your eyes, and take 3 deep breaths. And just settle into yourself. And now let yourself get real with whatever you might be feeling. Lots of material was covered. Lots of stories were told. Maybe some of the material or some of the stories touched your heart. Take a moment to sense that. Not trying to change whatever is there. Not judging it. Just letting yourself get curious. Get real with yourself. Now take one more deep breath and bring that sense of connection with you as you go on about your day. So before we open up for questions, just a reminder, if you have questions, you can put those in the chat. But I want to tell you about 2 events that are coming up with Opus Peace. What we just did, this meditation with anchoring your heart. Each year on February 2nd, Opus Peace recognizes that as National Anchor Your Heart Day. So on February 2nd each year at 3 p.m. Eastern, we have a global event where people from all around the world gather virtually and spend 15 minutes. We do a 3.5-minute meditation, but just coming together in collective stillness. In our rushed, chaotic world, there's very few times where we can actually come together and just pause, taking time to get real and feel whatever it is that we're feeling inside. And so we are committed to this date, February 2nd. So some of you may have already looked it up on your calendar and noticed it is a Sunday in 2025. And we are committed to the date because, as you know, February 2nd is Groundhog Day. And the groundhog is all about whether he sees or does not see his shadow. Much of the work that we do at Opus Peace involves taking a look at what's in your shadow. What things are you hiding? What things have you stuffed in that shadow that you don't want to come face to face with? And so we are committed to February 2nd. So each year this happens at 3 p.m. Eastern. The hour before each year, we do a free webinar that does have continuing education credits with it. And that webinar changes each year. This coming year for 2025, the topic will be the soul injury self-awareness inventory. So you can certainly join us for this. There is information on our website. And when I send out the follow-up email related to the continuing education, I will also put a link in there. I do hope that you will join us, share it with your faith communities, your friends, your family, your coworkers, so that we can come together globally and anchor our hearts. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is, this is Grief Awareness Week, and continuing on with the topic of grief and loss. Next week, we will do a webinar on Tuesday, December 10th at 12 noon Eastern, and the topic will be catastrophic losses. Many of you know that Florida, North Carolina, and many other southern states were hit by not one, but 2 hurricanes. They were back-to-back storms, and there has been major devastation related to that. The devastation goes far beyond just the physical devastation. And so we will be talking about that and other catastrophic losses. We will have our co-presenter who will be talking about a catastrophic loss that she experienced when her house burned down just a few weeks ago. So we do ask that you share this information with others. It's also featured on our website and our social media. There'll be emails coming out about it. I will also put a link to register for this in the follow-up email that I send out to you. Please register even if you can't be on live, because everyone who registers for that webinar will receive the recording the same day. So I do get that out same day so you can go back and watch it. It goes to everyone who registers, and you have a chance to also share it with family, friends, community members, and possibly coworkers. We all know someone at some point in our lives that has suffered some type of catastrophic loss. Maybe it wasn't you yourself, but maybe a neighbor or a friend. So it is definitely going to be a webinar worth attending with lots of information on how to respond during a catastrophic loss. So at this time, I'm going to just take us off screen share and hand it over to Molly. If there's any questions in the chat, again, if you have questions, please put it in the chat and we will take questions at this time.
Absolutely. Thank you again for a useful presentation. Absolutely. I have here just someone who says there were a few gold nuggets as a bereavement coordinator, and thank you for your time. I have one question in the chat so far that says, how do you all recommend working with someone who is ambivalent or even avoidant of the grief? How do you help them feel more comfortable with the act of mourning?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Ambivalence. I think we all have ambivalence about grief, right? I mean, who wants to just say, "Oh, guys, grief, come visit me. I'm going to show up. Sit down. Let's talk." And yet that's exactly what's going to help us move through the grief as opposed to around it. So the question is, how do you help people get there to the point where they can be more comfortable? Well, the first thing I would say is what we did today was the anchor your heart. I mean, the first thing you have to teach people is kind of a grounding technique, because if they tend to disappear, if they tend to avoid those kinds of things, then you want to teach them to be able to stay in their body. And that's what the beauty of the anchor your heart technique is, that it requires not a bunch of time, not a bunch of skill, not a bunch of no money, no anything. You can just do it right there. So I would start with just helping them anchor their heart. breathing deeply, because honestly, it's not so much the emotional pain, it's the fear of the emotional pain. So whoever asked that question is recognizing that what he or she's really saying is, how do I help them lessen their fear of emotional pain so they can be real with themselves. So I would say the first thing is just teaching them a very simple technique, have them go into their pain, so to speak, for just a very short time, just 10 seconds, being able to do this just for 10 seconds, just so they can get a glimpse that, okay, okay, all right, I feel that. And then close it back up. It's okay. They don't have to stay there, because if you just give your soul, you just give your body just a glimpse, just a little crack to open so that it can know that it's safe, then it will start coming in a natural way. The other thing I would say is be careful about pushing people to do their grief work, because there is a rhythm, there is a readiness, and we have to respect that. Um, at the same time, and many of you probably are bereavement counselors, you know that you have to respect it and you have to open the door. So ultimately, what we have to be able to do is be able to create a safe emotional environment so that that person can step through that threshold of themselves um, into the grief. So we need to know how to do that to create that safe emotional environment. So how to do that? Well, first of all, we have to be able to do it with ourselves, do we not? I mean, that was one of our slides. Father Dan always said to us, how can we help? It's unethical to ask our patients to do what we ourselves are unable or unwilling to do. So we have to always do that internal check. Am I sending signals to this person that I want them to be happy? I want them to, be making progress with their recovery. We can unconsciously really be wanting that. So we always have to do those self checks to make sure that we're okay abiding with that person's grief wherever they are, and they may progress slower than we want them to. So it's kind of all of those things. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that was perfect. We have some more pop in while you were answering, which is great. I'll just start simply. How do we sign up for the webinar on the 10th and for other Opus Peace webinars in the future? Yeah.
So the December 10th webinar is featured on our website. Also, when I send out the follow-up email, I will put the link in there as well, so everyone has it, and you can feel free to forward that link to anyone. If you want to be on our mailing list, you can certainly go on the contact us part of our website. That puts you on our mailing list and you'll get a mailing. We do a free webinar open to the public every single month. And so the best way to get that information is by being on the mailing list.
I will say, it's funny, some of you may have noticed I had to move because my internet signal became unstable. I had to move into my bedroom. And I forgot something that's sitting right here that I wouldn't have otherwise thought. I was when I'm presenting on Tuesday, some of what I'll be presenting is personal material because myself and my family suffered through these two hurricanes that came to St. Petersburg, Florida, where we live and where our Opus Peace home office is. One of the things that I have done to recover emotionally from all of the losses, and although there were a lot of physical losses, with catastrophic loss, it's those hidden losses inward that really get unassessed and get avoided because everybody's paying so much attention to the physical devastation. That at any rate, one of the things I did, we do a 4-day institute, and part of that institute is a loss inventory. So I took advantage of that last month because the hurricanes had just come through. We had a lot of upheaval in a lot of different ways. So I actually did the inventory, and it was still sitting here. So I'll show it to you real quickly. I know you can't see it. At any rate, but I had checked 14 losses specific to just the inward losses that I had experienced, and this was like a month after the hurricanes had come through, but 14 different losses. So anyway, I'll be talking about some of that on Tuesday. But again, it's just a powerful reminder too that if you're teaching this stuff, kind of going back to the previous question that someone asked, if we're going to talk about loss and stand before you with loss, we can't do it hypocritically. So, I mean, one of the reasons why I did this for myself, for my own healing and recovering after the hurricanes, is also I knew I would be talking about it, and I didn't want to be hypocritical about that. If I'm telling other people you need to be taking inventory and feeling your pain and feeling your hurt and choosing how to mourn it, how to express it, how to move through it, then I've got to make sure I'm doing it. And I have to say, I very quickly saw about 10 losses, but doing the inventory really helped me see about 4 more that I would not have paid attention to. So, but I'll tell you about that on next Tuesday.
Thank you. Yeah. We have another one here. How do you support others who have had loss during the holidays when it is so fresh? An example of the scheduled holiday celebrations.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. The holidays are upon us. I mean, Thanksgiving was just last week. Well, the first thing I would say is talk about it, plan for it right now. The season is upon us. Don't let it sneak up on and what have you. I am going to cover this on Tuesday, but the seasonal holidays are so fraught with tradition. I mean, many of my family members don't even have homes right now. The traditions, the decorate, all of those external things gone. A lot of relation. I mean, it's just everything's in upheaval. So, or even if you've just had the death of someone this past year and they're not going to be part of the holiday season, start talking about it right now. Second step is you have to kind of look as I'm doing right now with our holiday, what am I going to try to preserve so that I have some tradition, something stable, something quote unquote that used to be normal. What do I need to let go of completely because it can't be, and I need to grieve it and let it go? And third category is what needs to be modified, so to speak. I can preserve a little bit and it's going to have to change a bit and start and do it modified. So you have to kind of have those discussions. So I would say anybody that's had a significant loss that's going to impact this holiday season coming up, recognize it right now. And even though you may not want to be looking at it because it's going to be different and changed, talk about it with someone who will be safe to talk about and are not going to give you things like, oh, well, at least you can do this, or you should be grateful you can still do. I can't tell you how many times I've heard those kinds of things over the last month from people who know how we've suffered through the hurricanes. No, get someone that understands that this was a loss for you, and this is going to be difficult to make this transition through this season. This is a holiday season that is going to be different. So don't be with people that aren't going to try to minimize that or take that away from you. But start now. Don't let it sneak up on to you like the day before when your anxiety is rising. Oh gosh, I can't do it. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, prepare.
Got very specific to the information in your presentation. One of the selling your souls examples was staying busy, and I think everyone seems to do that. What encouraging way could you suggest communicating with a bereaved person so they don't get stuck in the stay busy mode? Most people say that they just need to be busy to make it.
And they do. So in the bereavement literature, it basically talks about you want to confront and evade. You need both. So there's times when you want to enter into the grief, and then there's times when you want to numb it out and do something different to distract you from it. You don't want to sit in the grief all the time. At the same time, you don't want a numbing agent all the time that makes you avoid the grief. So again, I would say, and that's really, as bereavement counselors, that's really what we do is kind of help people enter their grief and also know that you know, evading it, having a plan to put it aside. And you know, sometimes I'll even say, you know, some of the losses that I've experienced over these past 2 months is, you know, I'll come back and visit you later. Right now, I've got to go do this. You know, I've got to go do this webinar right now. See you later. You know, so we all have different aspects of ourself. We all have scattered pieces of self, and loss, when our fear of loss is what causes the scattered piece to begin with. So re-owning that piece of self has to do with feeling, you know, feeling the hurt of it. And then we have to rehome it, which means we have to create a safe place for it to come back home. But we don't need to be doing that 24 hours a day. It's not a full-time job. You know, we need to pay attention to other parts of ourselves that still have joy and you know, non-grief. We need both. It's the full spectrum that we want to experience. We don't want to just stay on one end, grief all the time, and be a victim of that. And we don't want to stay on, oh, I've got to be happy all the time. You know, there's no point in being sad. You know, what's the point of that? Let's just numb it out. And staying busy is absolutely, you know, it's one of the things, you know, when on Tuesday I'll talk about a little bit. You know, when you're so busy trying to find a place to live after a hurricane, for example, or getting new furnishings, or waiting for FEMA to come. I mean, it's waiting. There's just so much stuff. But you're busy, 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 busy. It's easy to be so busy just to get through the day and the physical stuff that, yeah, the grief and the losses just gets, you know, it'll be next year. Hopefully that people will slow down enough to say, oh gosh, look at the losses I didn't pay any attention to because I was just trying to get through the day.
We've got 3 minutes here. I just want to get to some quick questions about webinars in general. Somebody's asking, are all of the Opus free Peace webinars free?
Monthly webinars are free. They're typically always on the last Tuesday of the month. The month that is different is typically in December because of the holidays. We do it a little earlier. But we always send an email out the week before so people know about it and know how to register.
And then just also another quick one here. What was the name of the artist and the beautiful song at the end of the presentation?
Oh, I'm so glad to ask. That was by Karen Taylor Good. That song, she was actually nominated for a Country Music Award many years ago, specifically for that song. She used to play often at national hospice conferences, and that's how she and I met. But it's Karen Taylor Good, and the title is "How Can I Help You Say Goodbye." She has many, many CDs and songs, and they are all always about, you know, life's transitions and difficult things that a lot of people do not sing about. Our theme song at Opus Peace is written by her and sung by her. You can see that on our website as well. I'd recommend you go through. It has quite a story, but it's How to Be Real. You know, the title of it is Real, REAL. So yeah, Karen Taylor Good.
And then we've got, you mentioned abiding a couple of times. What do you mean by abiding?
What I mean by abiding, I mean, we think of empathy, and if you look up the word empathy in the dictionary, it means it says specifically an intellectual identification with someone else and what they're going through. So abiding includes that and more. It also means opening your heart to vicariously experience whatever that other person's going through at that moment. And I'll give you an example. I'll talk about this on Tuesday, but you know, I was in Home Depot after the hurricane, just buying a bunch of plastic crates to put storage stuff because my son lost his home. And you know, the clerk there looked at me and she said, from the hurricane, and I just nodded. I didn't say anything. And she said, you live on the beaches? And I just nodded my head. And what she did was she just said, she stopped what she was doing on the register. She just stopped and looked at me, and with such empathy, but more than empathy, because tears came to her eyes, and she said, I am so sorry. 4 words. That's all she said. 4 words. But it was the way she said it. She stopped. She connected. She felt the pain of why I was buying 20 cartons. You see, that's abiding. That wasn't just empathy.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, to Opus Peace and to Angie and Deborah for your time today. I know I personally found this session really helpful, and hearing from people in the Q&A that they did too. So we really appreciate you taking your hour of your day to share this with us. I know we didn't get to every question. We will have contact information in the recording sent in the email and the follow-up, and we really appreciate your participation and enthusiasm today. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Macy Catheter and Hospice Corps, for valuing what we have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all that were here that gave us your time.